Every mistake you deeply regret has one thing in common. You reacted. That message you sent in anger, that decision you made in fear, that moment you said something you could never take back because the emotion arrived before the thought did. Not one of those moments happened because you thought clearly. Every single one happened because something outside of you pulled a trigger inside of you, and you fired without choosing to. That is not weakness. That is biology. Your brain was not built for the modern world. It was built for survival, for immediate threats, for a world where reacting fast was the difference between life and death. But that world no longer exists, and yet your nervous system still runs the same ancient code. Fear still shuts down your ability to think strategically. Anger still floods your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for logic, consequence, and long-term decision-making, and takes it completely offline. When you are emotional, you are not thinking. You are reacting. And a life built on reactions is not a life you are living. It is a life that is happening to you. The Stoics saw this with extraordinary clarity thousands of years ago, not as a spiritual concept, as a practical reality. They understood that the battlefield that determines the outcome of your entire life is not in the world around you. It is in the space between what happens to you and what you do next. Master that space and you master everything. Lose it and you become a leaf in the wind, tossed around by every emotion, every provocation, every setback that crosses your path. This is what it means when you stop reacting and everything changes. Not that life becomes easier, not that the storms stop coming, but that you are no longer at their mercy. If this already speaks to something in you, subscribe now. Not just to follow a channel, but to strengthen the mindset that keeps you steady while everything around you loses control. The first thing to understand is that your emotions are not the truth. They feel like the truth. They arrive with absolute certainty, dressed in the language of reality, convincing you that what you feel right now is what is actually happening. But emotions are not facts. They are signals, and like any signal, they can be misread, exaggerated, and catastrophically wrong. Seneca wrote that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. Think about how much of your suffering has been real versus how much has been constructed by your mind in the minutes, hours, and days after something happened. The event itself may have lasted 30 seconds, but the spiral it triggered, the replaying, the catastrophizing, the imagining of every worst-case scenario, lasted days. That is not reality. That is your emotional system doing what it was designed to do, which is to protect you. But protection in the modern world often looks like paralysis. When you feel fear rising before a difficult conversation, that is not a signal that you are in danger. It is your ancient system pattern matching to threat. When anger floods through you after criticism, that is not a signal that you have been wronged. It is your brain defending the story it has built about who you are. When anxiety keeps you awake at 3 in the morning, it is not solving the problem. It is consuming the energy you need to actually solve it tomorrow. The moment you stop treating your emotions as truth and start treating them as data, information worth examining but not commands worth obeying, everything shifts. You stop being a passenger in your own life and you step into the driver's seat. This is not about becoming cold. This is not about shutting down your ability to feel. The Stoics felt everything. Marcus Aurelius grieved. Epictetus suffered. Seneca feared. What separated them was not the absence of emotion. It was that they refused to let those emotions make their decisions. The second thing to understand is what reaction is actually costing you. Most people are aware that they react too quickly. They know it in the aftermath, in the regret that follows the message they should not have sent, or the words they cannot take back. But they rarely calculate the full cost of living reactively. Every time you react from emotion instead of responding with intention, you hand your power to whatever triggered you. You are essentially saying, this person, this circumstance, this setback has more authority over my actions than I do. And when you give that authority away repeatedly, over weeks and months and years, you build a life that is shaped entirely by external forces rather than internal direction. Think about the person who reacts to every criticism with defensiveness. They never hear the feedback that could actually make them better because their system shuts down the moment it arrives. Think about the person who reacts to every setback with despair. They never develop the resilience that only comes from sitting with difficulty and choosing to move forward anyway. Think about the person who reacts to every provocation with aggression. They spend their entire life in conflict, burning bridges, burning energy, burning trust, all because they never learn to pause. Epictetus said it with complete precision. We cannot choose our external circumstances, but we can always choose how we respond to them. Your circumstances are the cards you were dealt. Your response is the game you play with them. And the quality of your response, not the circumstances themselves, determines the outcome of your life. That is not poetry. That is the most practical truth you will ever encounter. The third thing to understand is what mastery actually looks like in practice. Emotional mastery is not suppression. This is the most common misunderstanding. People hear the idea of detaching from emotions and imagine becoming robotic, indifferent, cold. A person who does not feel anything and therefore has nothing to offer the people around them. That is not mastery, that is avoidance. And avoidance is just another form of reaction, running from the emotion rather than being swept away by it, but still being controlled by it either way. Real mastery looks like this. You feel the emotion fully and completely. You do not push it down or pretend it is not there. You acknowledge it. You even name it. There is real neurological power in naming what you feel. It activates the rational brain and reduces the intensity of the emotional response. And then, in the space that acknowledgement creates, you choose. You choose how to respond. You choose what this moment deserves from you. You choose what action will serve your long-term vision rather than your immediate need for relief. Think of it as the difference between being inside the storm and watching the storm from a distance. You do not pretend the storm is not there. You do not ignore the wind and the rain, but you are not inside it being thrown around by it either. You observe, you assess, and you act with clarity that is completely unavailable to the person who is fighting the storm from inside it. Marcus Aurelius described this as standing apart from the situation, observing it as if from above, seeing it not as a personal attack or an unfair blow, but as simply what is. And from that perspective, the response becomes obvious, not easy. Obvious. This is the practice. Not a moment of sudden enlightenment, but a daily, deliberate choice to pause before you react. To create the space between stimulus and response. And in that space, to act as the person you are choosing to become rather than the person your impulses would make you. The fourth thing to understand is that this practice rewires you. Your brain is not fixed. The patterns of reaction you have built over a lifetime of responding emotionally to the world are not permanent. They are habits. And like every habit, they can be interrupted, replaced, and eventually dissolved entirely. Every time you pause instead of reacting, you are laying down a new neural pathway. Every time you observe your emotion without acting on it immediately, you are strengthening the connection between your rational mind and your emotional system. Every time you respond with intention instead of impulse, you are voting for the identity of someone who is in control of themselves. At first, this feels like effort, because it is. You will feel the pull of the reaction. You will feel the urge to respond immediately, to defend yourself, to release the pressure of the emotion by acting on it. And pausing will feel unnatural, almost wrong, because your system has been trained over years to release that pressure immediately. But with practice, something remarkable happens. The pause gets easier. The space between feeling and response grows wider. And eventually you reach a state that the Stoics described as equanimity, not the absence of emotion, but a deep, stable groundedness that the world's chaos cannot shake. People begin to feel this in you before they can describe it. There is a stillness around the person who has stopped reacting, a gravity, a quality of presence that makes them feel safe, trustworthy and powerful, not because they are louder or more impressive than anyone else, because they are immovable. They do not get rattled, they do not escalate, they do not perform their emotions for the room. They simply remain steady, clear, and completely in command of themselves. That quality is rarer than talent, rarer than intelligence, and it opens doors that nothing else can. The fifth thing to understand is what the other side of this practice actually feels like. Because most people imagine emotional mastery as a kind of grey, flat, joyless existence, a life lived behind glass, disconnected from the warmth and richness of human experience. The opposite is true. When you stop reacting to everything, you do not experience less, you experience more. Because you are finally present for your life, rather than constantly being yanked out of it by whatever emotional alarm just went off. You begin to notice what is actually here. The quality of a conversation, the texture of a morning, the small moments of beauty and connection that reactive living makes completely invisible. You stop wasting energy on outrage over things that do not matter. You stop draining yourself on conflicts that serve no one. You stop lying awake replaying conversations that ended hours ago. And all of that energy, all of that precious, finite life force gets redirected toward what actually matters: your work, your relationships, your vision, your growth. Carl Jung said the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And this practice, the practice of mastering your reactions, is ultimately the practice of accepting yourself completely, including the parts that feel fear, including the parts that want to react, including the parts that are still learning, without judgment, without suppression, with the calm authority of someone who knows that they are more than their impulses. When you reach that place, the world does not become your enemy. It becomes your training ground. Every provocation is practice. Every setback is a lesson. Every moment of discomfort is an opportunity to prove to yourself that you are the one in control. And that proof, accumulated over days and weeks and years of quiet, deliberate practice, becomes the foundation of a life that nothing and no one can take from you. The Stoics did not teach emotional detachment as a philosophy of withdrawal. They taught it as a philosophy of power, the power to remain clear when others are clouded, to move forward when others are paralyzed, to build steadily when others are being thrown off course by every wave of feeling that passes through them. You are not your emotions. You are the one who watches them. The one who decides what they mean and what they deserve, the one who chooses in every moment whether to react or to respond. That choice, made consistently and deliberately, is the beginning of everything. Stop reacting, start choosing, and watch what your life becomes. If this video shifted something in you, like it and share it with someone who needs to hear this today. Subscribe for more wisdom that cuts through the noise, and leave this in the comments to anchor it. I observe, I choose, I control. Until next time, stay stoic, stay strong, and stay unshakable.